Well, good day or whatever time it is for all of you. And on behalf of the Information Overload Research Group, I welcome you to the Information Overload Day 2020. Now, for those of you who don't know us, IORG is an interdisciplinary group. We make a point of that. It has industry people, academic people, consultants, software vendors dedicated to reducing information overload, which we do by working together to build awareness and to conduct research and to contribute to solution creation, and most especially to sharing information and resources, which is what we're doing today. And this year's theme of Information Overload Day is information overload in the post-COVID workplace, which is a subject that a year ago you wouldn't have dreamed of and you wouldn't have understood. But we live in interesting times today. I also wish to thank the event sponsor, Meter.ai, which is a small company that makes a very innovative AI-based solution that transforms your organizational communications into a strategic business asset by analyzing and predicting and optimizing the digital communication patterns in the organization, which can help you battle information overload. So go and check them out. And lastly, I hope that by Information Overload Day next year, humanity will have sent this blasted virus to join its buddies, the smallpox virus and the polio virus, and be gone. And until we do that, be safe and be well. And I now invite Jonathan Spira, IORG's Vice President of Research and Senior Managing Director of Accura Media Group, to present to you Information Overload 101.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you very much. We move to the next slide. First, I want to go over the agenda, and Nathan left out one of our constituent groups, which is end users. We have within IORG many small, medium, and large end user organizations over the years, ranging from IBM and Intel to, well, the company I'm associated with, Accura Media Group. Let me, before I start, run through today's session. We already had session one, so we can check that off. I'm going to start my talk in a moment, but after that, we will have Edna Pasher, who will talk about amusing and informing ourselves to death during the COVID crisis, and Marty Bariff, who will speak about information overload and working from home, and Michael Hoffman, who will then discuss information overload and the urgent and important, one of my favorite topics. So next slide, please. To begin, next slide after that. And then we'll have Q&A, closing remarks, and we'll return you to your regularly scheduled and overloaded day. Next slide. I'd like to mention that we received a letter from Senator Chuck Schumer recognizing Information Overload Day as a holiday and speaking to the issue. We'll have signed copies of this in the lobby as you exit. Next slide. My topic was going to be Information Overload 101, and then I was going to make it information overload in the coronavirus age, but I decided this morning actually to make this a much more personal topic. Next slide, please. See, twice I've run into overload situations. As many of you know, and that's why I call this a cautionary tale. As many of you know, I was chief analyst at Basics, a think tank studying the problem of information overload for over 15 years. And at the 15-year point or so, we truly had become so overloaded from our research that we had to do something completely different. Next slide. We decided to take all of our knowledge that we had about information overload and transfer it to content, to publishing actually, how taking what we know about how people absorb content and making it a reality in publications. So we did what anyone would do. We started a couple of magazines. We started Executive Road Warrior, which now is called Frequent Business Traveler. We started a magazine called The Green Car Driver, focusing on green fuel efficient cars. And we thought, that solved it. We're taking our knowledge and we're moving forward. But alas, next slide, please. That was not quite as simple as what I thought. In late January, we began to cover news of the coronavirus. I in particular thought this would be something that would be an interesting news item for a couple of months. So we actually began to offer a 3-month subscription to a newsletter with in-depth coverage of the coronavirus. Little did I know that by the time we were in our second week of the newsletter, the coronavirus topic would have taken over the entire magazine. Particularly debilitating from an information overload perspective were the coronavirus facts and figures stories that we ran on a daily basis. I began to feel as if I were a part-time epidemiologist. We analyzed the global figures. We looked at how well countries which were suffering the most were doing, or how not well they were doing. I was fluent in the number of cases and number of deaths per million members of the population. By the way, those two are probably the best two ways of measuring the different impact of coronavirus within a given country. And it honestly became to a point that we had to cut back on, especially this type of coverage, the facts and figures, because it was driving us crazy. We were more than just a little bit overloaded from this topic. I'm sure everybody's overloaded in terms of coverage, but we were overloaded in terms of covering. And we only saw one way out. The way out we saw was really just to cut back to some extent on the coverage and to make it less burdensome and debilitating for us without at the same time depriving our readers of key information. So the facts and figures began to morph into other things, and the newsletter only really lasted the first 3 months, because after that, everything was, the magazine's coverage was 95% coronavirus. We could not get away. Every day it was American Airlines is going to fly 30% of its schedule this month, or American Airlines is going to increase from 30 to 40% of its normal schedule. And you really, with travel and travel coverage, and our publications currently are the Travelist, Frequent Business Traveler, and the Green Car Driver, and Frequent Business Traveler Daily. You begin to see how it impacts a wide range of groups that you don't really think of. You see how the trickle-down effect in what truly is a trickle-down economy is impacted by this. Next slide, please. So that's my personal and cautionary tale. Let me move on to introducing a little bit more about our topic. And management science has always looked at the workplace in a very stoic manner. For example, I present to you this plant, this AT&T plant, showing you how people think of the workplace. Next slide, please. And of course, within the workplace, this is the workforce putting your telephones together here. The change, however, the difference is that, next slide, we've really morphed from an industrial, unskilled workforce to a skilled labor force, where today the unskilled labor is only 20% of the population at most. Next slide. However, that led to the rise of the knowledge worker. All of us here are knowledge workers. Today, knowledge workers comprise a plurality of the workforce, whereas a mere quarter century ago, industrial workers were. Next slide. The key element here is that we have to define, I'll just throw this up, I won't read it, what a knowledge worker is to further understand what's going on here, especially as it relates to information overload. We're in a knowledge economy. Next slide. So I just want to throw out one key takeaway from my research. We stumbled upon, a lot of the information overload stuff by looking at the shadows that we found within various surveys we conducted. And one thing I uncovered was the topic of recovery time. Recovery time is the time it takes you to get back to where you were after an interruption. Interruption could be self-interrupting. It could be someone knocking at the door, someone ringing the bell, someone sending a text, someone sending an email, someone calling you on the telephone, somebody calling your mobile, etc. It really doesn't matter what it is, but recovery time is 10 to 20 times on average the duration of the actual interruption. So you go from a 30-second interruption to 5 minutes. Now, I need to caution you, it's not conscious. You don't look at your watch and say, my recovery time is almost up. Yeah, okay, let's go. It's all unconscious. But if you've ever wondered, next slide, please, what happened to a third of your day, I just explained it. It's recovery time and it's information overload. It's my great pleasure now to introduce my friend and colleague, Edna Pasher, from speaking to us from Israel, and talking about a topic we worked on together, amusing and informing ourselves to death. Edna, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you for supporting me during the preparation of this presentation. Thank you, Nathan, for letting me know about your um, uh, conference in this very special day. And I owe the title to Jonathan, who combined two ideas that I will discuss in this presentation, amusing and informing ourselves today. I am a media ecologist. I did my PhD at NYU in a program called Media Ecology. And since then, I have been very much aware of this fact, and I will share it with you today, and especially what it means nowadays in this crisis that we are all in. At the top, you can see my two organizations. One on the left is since 1978, and it is a management consulting company that does research and consulting and training, collaborating with my friends all over the world. And on the right, you see an NGO which I founded 5 years ago, the Israel Smart Cities Institute, because I learned that my passion for innovation and pioneering new stuff needs a platform, and the platform is the city. And this is why this topic is so much trendy nowadays. And I decided to start this NGO to help municipalities design and lead the process of how they might become smarter. Next slide, please. Information overload was first brought to me to my attention by my mentor and friend, Professor Neil Postman, whom I owe everything that I do today. It all started with him. He died quite a while ago. Um, uh, the title of a presentation that he did many years ago was called Informing Ourselves Today, in which he showed what it means, information overload, which I don't have to tell you about. Next slide, please. This is a picture of me with him. I consider this presentation in his memory, so I just wanted to show the two of us together to all of you. Next slide, please. Postman spoke about the Faustian bargain we have made with technology. Technology gives and technology takes. It is very obvious even nowadays when we are all Zooming. It gives a lot. I cannot even imagine what my life would have looked like if we didn't have this online technology. On the other hand, we know that technology takes as well, and information overload is one of the big damages that we all suffer from with technology. Next slide, please. This is the book Postman read, which he called, Postman wrote, which he called Amusing Ourselves to Death. He compared two very famous books, one by Orwell, 1984, which some of you may know about or recall, and the other one is Brave New World by Huxley. And when he compared the two of them, both dealing with technology and reality, he said that Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us, that it would be a source for authoritarian people who take advantage of it, all kind of dictators, and he was very afraid of that, and they would conceal the truth from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. And this is what Amusing Ourselves to Death is all about. Next, please. To survive, we are desperately looking for the truth, so we know what to do. And nowadays, even more so, when even the physicians know very little about what to do with this terrible. My next slide, when it comes up, is about the truth pyramid. Since we all would very much love to get as close as possible to the world as it really is, to the truth as it really is, we need to remember that there are two levels in order to get to the truth. I have been very interested in the topic that Jonathan reminded us of before, the fact that we are in the knowledge economy, and inspired by Peter Drucker as well with the knowledge workers. And in this area, we all agree that there are main four levels. The bottom line is data. The second one is information. The third one is knowledge. And at the top is wisdom. Now I will go backwards. I want to know what at my age, what I need to know in order to survive in this pandemic. This is very important. So I am looking for knowledge, but I need to be able to ask myself, what should I do and what type of knowledge I need in order to be able to answer this question. And the ability to choose the type of knowledge that I really need in order to be able to know what to do is wisdom. Wise people know what type of knowledge to focus on, because we cannot know everything, of course. The next level then is, what information do I need in order to know what to do? Uh, for example, the difference between the two, if I stay with physicians, uh, two physicians can look at the same information, and one of them, because he is a deep smart, he knows what to do, and the other one does not know what to do. But both of them need information, and both of them need to find information that they can trust. And the last one, you cannot have good information if you don't know enough about the quality of the data that this information was based on, how this data was collected. At the beginning of the computer's age, remember that we all spoke about GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Yes, garbage in starts with data. If you put inside garbage, you are not going to get good information out of it, and definitely you will not know what to do. So it's very important that we make sure that we pay attention to all of these levels of how to get closer to the truth. Next slide, please. During the COVID-19, it becomes so very difficult because it has amplified the information overload. And we don't know how the data was collected, and we don't know how the information was created, and we don't know even what type of knowledge we could find with this overload of information, when Huxley already warned us that too much is very, very dangerous, and when Neil Postman said that we might die if we drown in this information. So it becomes very, very difficult. I can give you an example. In Israel, you have different sources of data and different sources of information, and we are drowned with so much and we don't know what to do. Even the very basic questions, such as how many unemployed people are there in Israel? It's not just that you are not going to get a good answer when you read the paper. It's that if you go into government statistics pages, one will say double the number of the other. It's just unbelievable. So the data is fake and the information is fake, and we are completely overloaded with all of it and we don't know what to do. Next slide, please. So I need to tell you something about solutions. And all I can do is share with you the solutions that I have adapted to myself during this time. First of all, I do constant sanity check with people I trust. But the problem is that some very good people that I really trust do not agree. I will give you some names. Some of you might even know. I am very friendly with Professor Yanir Bar-Yam from the New England Complexity Institute. And he is a leader, a world leader in the area of pandemics. He has one idea. His idea is lockdown for 5 weeks and then it's over. I have another very prestigious and very well-known expert from Tel Aviv University, Professor Itzik Ben Israel. He is a leader in science and in cybersecurity, and he thinks the opposite of what Yanir Bar-Yam thinks. So what I do...
Edna, there's 1 minute left.
Okay, so I'll just say that I focus on multiple perspectives. I talk to many of my friends, each from another perspective, and then I develop my own impression of reality. Next slide, please. Another way to get closer to reality is through storytelling. And what we see now is that the most effective way to explain how dangerous this disease is by listening to stories of people who were sick and tell you how they recovered and how it is all very terrible. Next, please. Next slide. It's my last one before the thank you slide. So the big question that I have, will artificial intelligence help us get closer to the truth? Maybe. I am very optimistic as always. Last slide, please. Thank you for listening. And this is my email, and I would love to be in touch with all of you. Thank you, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Edna, so much for this and for recalling Professor Postman. I'd like to now introduce Professor Martin Barrett and his topic of working from home. Marty?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan, for both introducing this topic in your opening remarks related to recovery time from interruptions, and also letting me use the cover from your information overload book, which really carefully depicts the tsunami of information that many of us experience on a daily basis. My topic is going to focus in on interruptions. As we can see, this gentleman has many sources of interruptions that are detracting from his ability to finish his tasks. But specifically, I want to focus in on the work from home environment. Okay, what are the new types of interruptions that we need to deal with, and some of the solutions that we could consider for preventing or at least minimizing the impacts of these interruptions. If we go to the next slide, please. So the theme from a 2019 Journal of Management article was really looking at interruptions as unexpected impacts from both behaviors and attention, but I do want to underline the word unexpected. Matter of fact, the definition of an interruption was something that was unexpected rather than planned. As we see here, unexpected interruptions can extend our workflow time, create both task and information overload, which could result in stress for ourselves, reducing our performance or productivity. Next slide, please. So one of my favorite sources, Herbert Simon, a deceased dual Nobel laureate in economics and psychology. One of his favorite, or my favorite sayings, is that he's looking at the limited attention capacity that we have with this wealth of information, and we need to allocate that attention efficiently. So the interruptions that occur for us really are going to conflict with our ability to complete our task on a timely basis. So we really need to manage these interruptions so that we can complete our tasks more productively. If we could see the first displayed line. Thank you. So some of these threats are some studies, one from Gloria Mark and her associates in 2016, that individuals were checking their emails on an average of 74 times a day, as much as, wow, 435 checks for some people. This was a study done in 3 high-tech organizations in California. And there have been a variety of studies shown here with Gloria Mark and others saying, when do these interruptions, how frequently do they occur? Gloria Mark's similar finding from that study was that every 10 minutes, external interruptions occurred. Okay, those that we typically don't have any control over. Dovico consulting firm found their results every 8 minutes, and The Economist did a study 2 years ago looking at social media interruptions occurring every 11 minutes. But essentially, these results do indicate that we are going to be interrupted, and we have to figure out how to manage this to reduce the impacts on our productivity. Rescue Time, which is a vendor that sells solutions for trying to improve our productivity, did a survey. They didn't identify how large it was, just in hundreds, but what was interesting, they compared work for home versus the normal office situation. Interruptions, there was less in the work from home environment, 44% versus 55%, which I must say is a little surprising. I would have anticipated more as we will get further into the presentation. Phone calls, however, increased a whopping 58% at home compared to 18%. So there were a different type of medium, if you will, looking at telephone calls. And sometimes when the stress is so great for us, we ourselves will choose to self-distract just to reduce that stress and try and move on with our activities on a timely basis. The next slide, please. So what are some of these unexpected interruptions in our work from home? So this list will suggest some samples, and actually Jonathan gave us some examples before. It could be someone at our residence, spouse, partner, children, you know, asking for things immediately, non-urgent, but nonetheless interruptions. The doorbell delivery, the service person working on something at our home, which we have to answer questions or pay them at the end. Running errands unexpectedly, utility malfunction for heating, air conditioning, whatever that draws us away from our work tasks. And then continuing communications from our stakeholders at work, whatever the medium is, by telephone, texting, or email. And always the social media interruptions that can occur depending upon how we manage those. The next slide, please. So we're going to do a poll now just to find out, all of you, okay, how have the work from home interruptions compared to those that have occurred at your normal office? If we could see that poll, and if you could just participate, it would be interesting to see what your experiences are. I know I myself, well, I won't answer that and bias your response, but if you could respond within the next 30 seconds, and let's just take a look at how all of you are experiencing work from home interruptions, whether they're more significant, about the same, less significant, or maybe you're not working from home at all. Okay, so I'll let Lele determine when we have a sufficient number of responses, and we'll take a look at the results. Okay. Okay. Well, surprising about the same. As a matter of fact, when we look at the more, 19%, we have a greater number that are less, say 32%. Okay. Um, so maybe all of you are better managing your work from home interruptions than I would have anticipated. And I applaud you for that. That's great. But nonetheless, even that 20% having more, we need to do something to reduce that. So the next slide, please. So what are some of the consequences from these interruptions that occur? So we'll see a listing that will be displayed momentarily. The recovery delay that Jonathan had mentioned, Gloria Mark's study a while ago, 23 minutes for recovery time. Jonathan's study at Basics, 5 minutes for a 30-second interruption. The economist indicated 15 minutes, but all of these are non-trivial recovery times. And what are some of the impacts related to dealing with the interruptions in the recovery time? Some studies have indicated that people have increased their speed of work after the interruption to try and compensate for the lost time of the interruption in recovery time. They may have lost some of their focus on task. They weren't able to really resume to the same degree of task focus, which indeed leads us to the next item, that we may have errors and mistakes that are increasing because of the interruption, especially if it's an unanticipated interruption. There was a small study done at Michigan State University indicating that a 3-second interruption doubled the error rate. Now, this admittedly was done in an experimental setting. It wasn't in the field, so we have to take that into consideration. But some of the ad hoc findings have indicated that errors and mistakes have increased, and some have suggested that the depth of our thinking before the interruption is less so after the interruption, that we can't get ourselves into that really focused, deep thought. We lost that pattern, unfortunately. And one study, again, from Gloria Mark and Associates, indicated that after the interruptions occurred from external resources, then individuals would self-interrupt themselves because they got into this flow, you might say, or pattern of interruptions. In the economist loss, we have a few findings in terms of the economic loss, my mistake, from social media impacts $650 billion estimated loss, or 4,500 hours per worker. Very, very large. And a study from Jonathan's firm at Basics indicated that the combination of interruptions and recovery time impacted 28% of a knowledge worker's day, or an estimated loss per year of $588 billion. So if we look at both of those, close to $600 billion lost per year. That's really staggering. And this last little result from consulting firm Next Learning, saying that employees from their survey are spending more than 90 minutes a day recovering from email interruptions. This really is non-trivial, and for those 20% that are being impacted more at home, we really need to help you out. No question about that. Next slide.
3-minute warning here.
Thank you. Okay, my next slide has just a few more. Okay, so looking at the stress impacts, which can indeed reduce our productivity. You can see in the second quadrant, there's an optimal level. Some stress is good. It will help us move forward with our task, but easily it can be dysfunctional and reduce our productivity. In the next slide, we'll see some additional recommendations forthcoming. In the next slide. Okay, so the list that we'll see displayed here includes, as soon as it, okay, then we might explain to our coworkers some of the consequences of having these uninterrupted, unexpected interruptions by having a communications contract, and this has had mixed results. Even Nathan, our president of IORG, when he was at Intel, that was not necessarily all that effective, but it might be a way of trying to reduce the unexpected interruptions, or try and schedule them, make it known to our stakeholders, only interrupt us, if you will, during lunch or other breaks, or at home, delegate the door answering and service person interactions to our partner or spouse. We may have worn headphones at work as a signal that we're trying to focus. We could do the same at home, or create an interruption log that we could actually record for every interruption, how long the interruption took, and how long it took to recover. On the next slide, we have a few remaining recommendations for the next slide. Okay, so this list indicates to us that from this rescue time survey focused on work from home, individuals, 45% modified their notifications from cell phone, email, indicated through email, or again, cell phones do not disturb, 29%, and then some posted indications by cell phone or email that they will not respond, very quickly. Okay, and we should really try and preserve our focus, because this helps us move through our tasks. One suggestion from Muse, a consulting firm, their people were rated on productivity, and the top 10% of those productive individuals did their tasks for 52 minutes, took a 17-minute break. At Fast Company, they countered in saying that per hour they gave their employees a 5-minute break. That seemed to be better than a 17-minute break. And again, with rescue time, they suggested that really 40 minutes should be the maximum that we focus in on the task before we take a break. And again, as we use different ringtones in our cell phones, we could do that at home, indicating different sources. How do we want to react? Or even the chairs that we sit on at home, our cameras and our speakers. Do our employers give us some compensation so we can have the best ergonomics to reduce the stress? So let me just share a few quick takeaways as we're closing this presentation on the next slide. So what I'm suggesting for you to consider when this okay, be aware of these work from home unexpected interruptions. Create a list of what you've experienced. Think about what potentially could happen and how you're going to mitigate these interruptions, whether they're known or potential. And certainly make a log of what new unforeseen interruptions that have occurred for you, and what might be some potential remedies. You might even consider building in a little buffer, extending your planned task time, realizing that unexpected interruptions will occur as much as we're trying to prevent them. Because we know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of a cure. So we really need to give this careful consideration. And our closing slide is just indicating what indeed might a consequence be. So we don't want to be impacted so that our task times are extended, our focus is lost, we make mistakes. Try and understand what these unexpected interruptions are and mitigate them to prevent them from happening as much as possible. So thank you for your attention and listening to this, and I hope that your life at home related to work will improve. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Marty. I appreciate it. I should add that this talk came about when Marty went on around this topic at an IORG board meeting. And after he finished his small discussion, I said, well, that solves the problem of the filling the speaker slot. You're it. So I really appreciate it. I also want to mention that finally that damn fly left. He said he mistook this for the vice presidential debate, so he apologized. With that, I'd like to now ask Michael Hoffman, someone I've also known for many years, to discuss the problem of unnecessary interruptions in the workplace, and specifically to focus on the question of importance versus urgency, topic I cover in my book, my book Overload, How Too Much Information Can Be Hazardous to Your Organization, which Marty was kind enough to use the cover of. And that is covered in the chapter called The Two Threads. Why it's called The Two Threads, I'll leave you to find out by reading the chapter. But Michael, please take the mic.
Great. Just make sure I'm unmuted. There we go. So first, I want to thank Nathan and Jonathan for inviting me to speak, and Lele for his fine production. The first thing I want to do is set the record straight. IO is not an abbreviation for information overload. IO means I overload, me. David Allen once quipped, if information overload was an issue, you'd walk into a library and you'd explode. Today, I'm going to talk about how we overwhelm ourselves with information. It would be great to blame IO on external sources like social media or not having enough of the right tools. Tools, of course, help. After all, I provide a tool. But we're the real culprits, or rather, there's a phenomena in our brains that is. We overload ourselves by somehow confusing urgency and importance. Intellectually, we understand there's a difference between the two, but add a pinch of stress, think COVID-19, not having enough recovery time, or letting our guard down, and a naturally occurring phenomena in our brain causes us to blend importance and urgency together, and that makes it difficult to discern the difference between information that is important and information that is just information. And when that happens, everything becomes important and I overload. So let me lay out my agenda for the 10 minutes I have left. I'm very conscious of the time. We're going to start out with understanding the difference between importance, usually the vital few, and urgency, often the trivial many, quite often hiding in interruptions. Second, I'm going to demonstrate just how easy it is, unfortunately, to blur what's important with what's urgent. I'm going to do that while I check my mails. I'll relate to you how cognitive dissonance permeates our behaviors and makes us do the damnedest things, literally. In advance, I want to let everybody know that some of what I'm going to say might make you a little bit uncomfortable. But how can we speak about dissonance without at least some discomfort? Finally, I'm going to show you how to resolve cognitive dissonance with what Stephen Covey called the 4 endowments. Okay, so let's look at why we put urgency before importance and how it undermines us. So first of all, what's the difference between importance and urgency? Well, imagine that when I'm talking about importance, I have my hand on my heart. Not too hard to imagine because you can see me right now. So when I'm talking about the things that I value, and usually the things that I've planned, I'll have my hand on my heart. So when I'm talking about urgency, however, then I'm pointing to my watch. Urgency has to do with some form of time pressure, most often in the form of interruptions and unplanned work. So you can kind of hear that these are very different things. Now imagine a board meeting in 3 months, right? It's not urgent, but it's very important. On the other hand, a notification of a leadership seminar today that just popped into your inbox, that's an interruption, the watch. But even if the subject matter is interesting, that planned item in your calendar should always take precedence over that thing that just popped in. Oh, you don't have something planned in your calendar yet at 2 o'clock. Well, there's another reason why you might be suffering from OI. Okay, let's try 4 examples to see if you get the difference, right? Get ready to put your hand on your heart or point to your watch. Okay. So, a notification regarding a family reunion in 2025, asking for a response. Important, or is that an interruption? Well, it's an interruption, but it's important, right? Come on, everybody, you have to put your hand on your heart when it's important. Okay, it's important. Okay, an article about quasars is sent to you by a buddy. Interruptions. What's coming in Netflix next week? Interruption, right? An agenda for a project meeting in an hour. Gotcha. It's urgent, right? So you do point to your watch, but it's also important. Now, I know some of you are thinking, yeah, but what do I do about competing urgency and important things? That's going to be a subject for another talk. So in any event, it only makes sense to eliminate what is both urgent and not important as much as possible. So why is it that we so often do the opposite? And now I'm going to have to share my screen for a moment. And hopefully you see my screen. So somebody's going to scream at me if you don't, right? So here you see the Eisenhower.
We don't.
You don't? Oh. Now?
Now we starting.
Let me know. Some people have.
All good.
So here we have the Eisenhower quadrant. I think a lot of people are familiar with that. I don't have to rehash this. I'm going to focus in on the 3rd quadrant. Okay? This is the place where we have the most problems. This is where we have the interruptions, most of our email, popular activities, administration, a lot of phone calls, text, all of that stuff. This is where the non-planned wins over the planned. So why the heck do we go there? Oh, sorry. I'm going to answer that, but first I'm going to have to check my mail. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So actually, this is a great opportunity to show you how you can battle cognitive dissonance and discern urgency and interruptions from importance. I'm going to do this while I look at my mail. So in this glass I'm holding, or rather the glass that I'm holding symbolizes my inbox. And the water inside the glass are the mails that I've planned for today. Now, the fact that they're due today makes them both important and urgent. And notice that it's already pretty full, kind of like your inbox. Okay, so I'm going to add some water into this glass each time I add something to my inbox. So obviously, I'll have to be pretty careful. And the trick is to delete the mails that are urgent but not important to avoid I/O. Okay, so here's the first one. A newsletter. I never read this newsletter. Delete. But I have to add a little water because it does take me a little bit energy just to read that and delete it. Okay. So a mail from Louise. Now, he needs my help. I wonder why it doesn't ask Estefania. Well, I need to help him right after this webinar. Well, you know, employees first, so I have to put a little bit of water in there for him. Oh, this looks like a great TED Talk. I get a lot of value from TED Talks. I look at them all the time. Actually, I run and listen to TED Talks. And this one looks really important. So I'm going to add a little bit of water here. A New York Times breaking story, something about COVID. I don't want to be one of those ignorant people and not pay attention to what's going on in the world. I'm just going to, it's a pretty long article too. Oh. I've totally diluted what I value. I confused interruption mails with important and urgent mails. I knew I'd be a bit nervous for this webinar, but I didn't think I'd wet my pants. So why would I do that? not wet my pants. Why would I confuse important and urgent, especially after advocating the opposite? Need to go back to my screen. So let me know if I'm back on there. Sharing screen.
We're good.
Great. What a mess. So the answer is cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is holding two or more beliefs that are contradictory at the same time. It kind of looks like this, right? Here you have true and false competing, kind of like politicians before an election. So cognitive dissonance is why we can both support the death penalty and be pro-life. It's why deeply religious people can go to war and kill human beings they profess to universally love. And it's why I watched a few non-topic or off-topic TED Talks while I was preparing for this talk, even with my deadline looming. So I'm not immune. Smokers are another great example. Everybody knows it's bad for you, but you continue anyway. And you'll hear them say, well, I'm not addicted. I really like smoking. I like to have that with my cup of coffee in the morning. And by the way, we all try to explain away our cognitive dissonance. And there's an actual scientific term for that, and that is dissonance reduction. And speaking of science, let's go back 63 years ago to 1957 and meet the man who coined the phrase cognitive dissonance. It was Professor Leon Festinger who ran an experiment to understand how we could maintain two opposing opinions. And what he did was he took two graduate students and he asked them to perform a menial task. And that was something like turning a crank or turning a few cranks on a board. And they did that for 2 hours. And at the end of the task, he asked one of the graduate students, was it boring? But before he did that, he gave him $1. And the graduate student said, yes, it was boring. Then he turned to the other graduate student and he gave him $20, which was a little bit of money in 1957. And the other graduate student said, no, it wasn't that boring. The second graduate student couldn't differentiate the intrinsically boring quality of the task with the reward. So he created a perception that was highly inaccurate. Kind of like what I did when I was dealing with my email. We both sacrificed our intrinsic values. And this is important. When cognitive dissonance is present, rewards or even the idea of rewards confuse our value system. They cause our opinions to compete with each other. So being influenced by cognitive dissonance is like having the devil. We heard a little bit about that earlier, the use of the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. So I'm thinking, hey, I really do want to watch this TED Talk, or I really want to read the rest of this very interesting article. And the devil says, hey, yeah, you like this kind of article, and I think you should watch this TED Talk. And the angel is saying, get back to work. So here's why this matters. Number one, you need to know that no matter how intelligent you are, we are all susceptible to cognitive dissonance. And it's a vicious cycle. So unimportant items getting in the way increases stress. More stress, more susceptibility to cognitive dissonance. And the more susceptible you are, the more you'll add more unimportant items to your plate. Und so weiter, und so weiter. So number two, it requires significant effort to beat it. You need to develop a particular mindset. And I'll bet the majority of this audience has a Facebook app or an Instagram app on their phone, or both. And somewhere you know that this is not the best IO strategy. Back to my screen one last time. So now the $1 million question, how do we beat it? Well, first we have to understand that we can't go east and west at the same time. Notice this train moving into the tunnel. Wait a second. Notice that the train is moving out of the tunnel. Wait, it's moving in again. No, it's moving. Do you get my point? My point is that we have to stop the train because our minds can go either way. These are the competing ideas that I'm talking about. You have to choose importance over urgency. So how do we resolve cognitive dissonance? We're going to utilize...
Two minute warning.
Got it. We're going to utilize our 4 endowments: self-awareness, conscience, imagination, and independent will. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that muscle because it is kind of like a muscle. We're going to strengthen these things by thinking about them. The first one, self-awareness. Notice your cognitive dissonance, right? That's the first step in living your life by design rather than by default. How do you notice anything? You slow down, you stop, you take note, right? So write it down. Write down how you spent your last couple of hours. Write down how you spent your day. Journalize. Second one, conscience. Maintain the mindset of a mentor or a teacher. So I often think about, especially when I'm in a tight situation, I think that there's a camera peering down on me. What would somebody learn by observing my actions? What am I teaching? What behavior am I modeling? By the way, there are lots of tools you can use as well. So fighting OI works best if you take a proactive choice like planning out your days in advance. That's modeling. Imagination. What options do I have? So TED Talks are important, but I got to limit myself. I'll be more careful about unsubscribing instead of just deleting every time I get one of those mails. Oh, sometimes I am doing the right thing. And finally, I'm going to prevent interruptions by my colleagues. And here's what one of my colleagues did. She puts a little piece of cardboard on her screen when she needs to concentrate. A great simple tool, really lean. Finally, independent will. I will. I overload after all. I can prevent myself from overloading. It doesn't matter what I did before. I can jump out of urgencies. No one's going to punish me for returning to my values. And if all else fails, there's always the bigger glass. So I hope, if nothing else, that you came away with 3 key ideas from my talk. 1, be aware the wolf of urgency wearing sheep's clothing to feign importance. Number 2, take heed. It ain't easy. You'll have to change your mindset and be vigilant. Get a coach or a mentor, or even a spouse or a friend. There are good tools out there that can also help, like Lean Mail. And if you do, you'll not only be more productive, you'll be happier. Hopefully, doing the things that you value make you happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And bravo. Well done, everyone. So at this point, as we're about to start our second poll, please take a moment to take the poll since Lele has put it up. It's okay, Lele, put it back. And then we'll go into Q&A. I already have several good questions from members of our studio audience, but let's see how this. Should note we don't have a none option, but if you have none as your option, pick other. Oh my, I'm on screen. So with that, slides, please. Dele. Thank you. So we're now in our Q&A mode. Going to start off with a question for all of our speakers. At what point did you first begin to feel that you were overloaded by information, and whether or not you called it information overload, email overload, or anything else, please let me know. Who would like to, out of our speakers, pick up on that first? Well, not everyone at once. I'm going to start just picking people.
Jonathan?
Michael?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a tough question. I think that's why you're not getting a response, because first of all, not everybody is conscious of the overload that they're getting, because they receive it in so many different ways. And, you know, when we, for instance, when we're looking at these poll results right now, we see all the different possibilities to get overloaded, and we simply don't notice that we're getting overloaded until it's kind of too late. I don't mean too late that we can't do anything about it, but I mean, it's very difficult at the end of the day to know, was it email or social media or the team collaboration? Was it Zoom that has made me feel overloaded? To give you more of a concrete answer, I think a lot of people find having a lot of Zoom conferences, I certainly do, can wear you down. So I think that's where I get most of my information overload, because you have to act differently in a Zoom conference than you do when you're speaking with a person, because you don't have this, you don't have the body language, right? You're just a talking head.
Yeah, let me flip this. I agree, by the way, which is why when it's my own question. That's why I just, you know, decidedly chose a difficult one. Marty, would you care to hop on this for a moment, please?
Yes, I think for me, email is the devil. And I probably get close to 200 emails a day, even with my filtering and putting things in different folders. I find that I'm probably spending 30 to 60 minutes a day looking at emails, which is unfortunate.
The question, though, is when did you first notice, if you did, that you were being overloaded, and, you know, how did you notice it?
Basically, yes, it comes back again to email, and this is probably, I'd say maybe a good 15 years ago, and it's a sad situation that I still have not been able to solve it completely, even using filters in Google email. So this is an ongoing challenge for me, and I guess I would agree with Michael in the sense that I actually sign up for a number of sources that could be sending me information, and what I need to do is reduce those sources. I'm self-inflicting overload that way.
Edna, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I would like to say that my first attention to the problem was when I studied with Postman at NYU. The time was the age of television, and he gave us all kinds of statistics, how terrible it is that children are exposed to television 7 hours a day on the average. I even remember the number. And his best advice was just turn off the television. Don't let your kids watch more than 1 hour a day. So this was the first time that I was aware of amusing ourselves to death. Nowadays, in the time of COVID-19, I can tell you that the amount of information from even television regarding this pandemic is so unbelievable that I've decided that I don't want to watch the news, and I would rather read a book or watch a good movie because it's unbelievable. The last thing that I would like to say is that the youngsters nowadays those who are called Generation Y and Generation Z and the millennials, they have a syndrome called FOMO, and I wrote it in the chat. Fear of missing out. They are overloaded, and I absolutely agree with Michael. They do it to themselves. It's the I overload because they are constantly afraid that they might lose something. So they are overloaded and they are informing themselves to death.
Before I ask Nathan to address the question, I want to first point out it's not limited to Gen Y and Gen Z and Gen X, who are millennials. Also, prior generations are not immune. We've always actually had a fear of missing out, but there's you know, there are different ways of looking at it and interpreting it. Lele, could you, our board member Lele, who's also operating the controls for this, Lele, could you jump in and say what you were telling me?
And about the chat, what I shared in the chat?
Yeah.
So I mean, the question is for our speakers, right? So it's regarding the the fear of missing out as well. For me, I think I grew up in an environment with a lot of media. My father was a journalist, right? But so maybe from that side it was more biased. But generally, I see a lot of people going every morning to buy the newspaper, right? Also in the past when there wasn't internet, when there weren't this information, and wasn't it also fear of missing out? Wasn't also this? So what we changed the channel, but did we really change everything, or is the same as before?
Yeah, I think the story of the newspaper. My grandparents, my grandfather on my mother's side couldn't go without the market reports, both on the radio and in the newspaper. And my grandmother watched the news every morning, which is a habit I started to grow into. And we discussed it then right after. Nathan, could you jump onto this question?
Actually, I want to respond to, or to comment on the television thing. And here's what happened with me. We were relocated to America, to Santa Clara in the 80s. And suddenly we went from like 2 TV channels to 300 TV channels. And my daughter, who was in elementary school, started consuming. And so I had actually a good idea. Instead of going into battle mode, I asked her to take a piece of paper and for 1 week record everything she was watching. And when she took one look at the list at the end of the week, she got it. And it scared her so much that she cut back voluntarily. Smart kid.
Awesome.
Bravo. I would add further to that very often, and this is a phenomenon I've both written about and I've had personally, you go to watch something, you see, I have on my Apple TV numerous apps where I can consume different content, and I look, and after careful deliberation for about 15 minutes last night, I settled on It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, a rerun from my childhood, as opposed to any of the new content that was being thrust at me. Michael, did you want to add something? Our speaker, Michael Hoffman?
Yeah, I did. Because I'd like to bring up 2 other things. One is environment. Just don't buy the chips. That's what I usually tell my wife. If you don't buy the chips and bring them home, you're not going to go in the cupboard and find them, right? So one thing is to limit yourself. I don't really believe in limiting others too much, because I think there's a much better way to do that, and that is to, I mean, if you think about flow, Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, the whole object of that book and of flow is to find happiness, right? So if you're real busy finding your happiness or doing something extremely important, i.e. you're on a cliff of a mountain, reaching for the next ledge, you're not going to be checking your phone, right? You're not going to be looking for other stuff. You're going to be focused and concentrated on what you're doing. And I would say people who have a lot of information overload simply have too much time on their hands because they're not spending the time on the things that they need to do the most. So it's really evaluating what it is that you really need to get done and getting clear on that.
To some extent, I need to sort of bring back to one addition, try and get one more question in. To some extent, Michael, yes, but I don't think that everyone who has lots of information overload falls into that. I think there are people who are simply ill-equipped for one reason or another to manage the flow of information, which is why we need better tools. One more question for our speakers. To what extent do you believe that information overload is a bad thing? I'll start with Michael since you're on camera.
Sure. To a great extent. I think people need to do something about that, but themselves. And you just mentioned about tools. Well, obviously, I produce a solution that is a tool for information overload. So I'm a big believer in tools. But you're not going to even look for my tool unless you consider how important it is that you need to do something better, right? So, for instance, we talked about email, and if we look at the poll, it says that email is the biggest source of information overload. Yet, how many of you out there have looked for a great solution to take care of that? If you have Outlook, you can come to me. But the point is that it's bringing up the level of interest to do something about it. That's really the start.
Thank you. Marty?
Yes. I think that for me, and maybe others also that are in this webinar, that the stress factor is probably the greatest evil, in the sense that this overabundance of information overload, I really get stressed out and I don't know which way to turn, and even using the Eisenhower matrix on importance and urgency, if I can't apply that in some disciplined way, and I don't know how to include the consequences related to the urgent and the important ones, I'm always trying to balance this out. I think that is harmful to my ability to make progress on tasks, that I get, you might say, distracted by trying to figure out which sources of information or interruptions I'm going to deal with first. How do I prioritize that? That's why I think the Eisenhower matrix is so important and potentially helpful, because the overload, I mean, in some sense, when you're doing a Google search, and if you're a very curious person, it may be interesting to look through all the items, prioritize how they are, if you have the time. But time is something that we all have restrictions on. So you're trying to find, the information and the most valuable prioritization so you can get your task done. But I think information overload is harmful in the sense that it lowers our productivity because of the greater stress.
Thank you, Marty. Edna?
I think that it's a bad thing, and I will just share with you what I do about it. I believe in complexity as a good perspective on life, complexity theory that comes from the natural sciences. And what we see there is that the best strategy is iterativity, or letting yourself co-evolve with the environment. So the way to implement it using overload of emails, for example, I always scan them very quickly. I choose only those that are important. I absolutely agree. And I leave the others. I never just sit and read them in any order. I always look for the patterns, and I highly recommend it. The idea of the 80s to do it right the first time is a bad idea. We need to find the way to do things right by doing them in different stages and be happy with the first scanning that maybe we miss something, but 90% is enough to take care of the important stuff.
Thank you. I would like to say that to answer this question, I think that information overload is just going to be a fact of life, and we need to develop better personal ways of dealing with it. The underlying principle in everything I've written about information overload is that, to borrow from Pogo, we have met the enemy and he is us. The question is that not only are we our own worst enemy, but we engage almost recklessly in tasks which I could call super spreader tasks with respect to information overload, now that the term super spreader sadly has entered the English vocabulary. But we not only hit reply to all, we send emails saying great, thanks. Famous last words on people's tombstones will be great, thanks. I really think we need to look into the mirror, look into the looking glass, and see what we're doing in terms of how our own individual impact, replying to all to 5,000 of our closest colleagues, how all that, while it sounds relatively simple, has a massive impact on everyone's productivities, everyone's well-being, everyone's work-life balance, if there is indeed somewhat work-life balance left, and most importantly, our sanity. So with that, next slide. Camera back to me. I can wave goodbye. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Meter.ai, provider of AI-driven communication strategies, and thank them for sponsoring our event. And Lily, camera switch, please. And would like to wish everyone here a not only happy information overload day, but a thoughtful information overload day, so that we can take the next steps to dealing with the problem, addressing the problem, and, as the phrase that I've trademarked, lowering the overload. So if you leave here with one thought, lower the overload, and please do what you can to do that and to make everyone, suffer less from the mess that we have created. Point out that the total amount of information that is in one Sunday New York Times is approximately the year-long consumption of information that someone living in the 17th century might have consumed. Think about that for a moment. And I could go on with quotes from the 15th and 16th centuries about how the abundance of books that's being published is just overwhelming. It's always a question of information overload in our time. So please be thoughtful and careful. I'd like to thank our speakers. Lily, I'm not sure people see me waving goodbye. Could you just check? I see Edna right now. I'd like to thank our speakers, Michael, Marty, Edna, in reverse order, and Nathan. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming. And with that, I bid you adieu, as we say in my first language, Auf Wiedersehen, and goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.